Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Reuven speaking to you today from just east of Jerusalem here in Israel. Today is the 29th day of the month of Kislev, the final day of the month of Kislev, 5781, December 15th, 2020, fifth day of Hanukkah. This coming Shabbat Miketz. We're reading Parashat Miketz, continuing saga of Yosef and his brothers, beginning the book of Genesis, chapter 41, verse 4, concluding chapter 44, verse 17. I mentioned I'm just east of Jerusalem today because I didn't go into my office in Jerusalem today. I stayed home. It's Chanukah. The days are short, and soon I will be lighting my Chanukiah for the sixth night of Hanukkah. So I decided to stay home and record from my home studio today. As I said, just east of Jerusalem. So much to talk about. I hope you're all enjoying Chanukah. We've gone through 5 days, more than halfway through Hanukkah, and each day we add a light. Each day the light gets brighter. We're going to be talking about that in a moment. Winter hit Israel today. I mean, it's been wintry, but today it got really cold and gray and rainy, and it's really feeling like winter today more than it has up till now, but as to be expected. Being the 15th of December, winter I think officially comes in 1 week from today, but we're all ready for it. I'm just going to skip onto Parashat Miketz and read, as I like to, the first verse in Hebrew, then in English, and talk about that for a moment, and then get back to Rosh Chodesh, the new month, beginning tonight, the month of Tevet, and more about Hanukkah. Let's go to Miketz. It is in Genesis chapter 41, verse 1. First, I'm going to read in Hebrew, and then in English. Vayehi Miketz shenatayim yamim ufarao cholem v'hine omed al hayaor v'hine min hayaor olot sheva parot yafot mar'eh uvriot basar ותראינה באחו, והנה 7 פרות אחרות עולות אחריהם מן היאור רעות מראה ודקות בשר, ותעמודנה אצל הפרות על שפת היאור. ותאכלנה הפרות רעות המראה ודקות הבשר את 7 הפרות יפות המראה ובריאות ויקץ פרעה. Okay, I read the first 4 verses. Curiously enough, it began with Vayi Miketz, meaning at the end of, and it ended with Vayikatz, Pharaoh, and Pharaoh woke up, meaning his sleep ended. Vayikatz Paro, he woke up from his sleep. So let's read it in English. And it came to pass at the end of 2 years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river, in Hebrew Yaor, that's the Nile River. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 cows, well-favored and fat of flesh, and they fed in the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean of flesh, and stood by the other cows upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed cows ate up the 7 well-flavored and fat cows. So Pharaoh woke up. And we know that he's going to sleep again and have another dream, a parallel dream, and he's going to call all his wise men and magicians and soothsayers and ask for interpretation of this dream, and no one can offer one. And of course the cupbearer remembers that there was an Hebrew inside the jail that Pharaoh had put him in that was very good at solving the riddle of dreams. And he mentions this to Pharaoh. Now, this was after 2 years, so we know that when Yosef said goodbye to this cupbearer who was going free, he said, please remember me to Pharaoh. Please mention my name because I'm here unjustly. And we're told at the end of last week's parasha, last week's reading, that the cupbearer forgot about Yosef, and now only 2 years later does he remember Yosef. We're actually continuing this whole saga of Yosef and his brothers, and here Torah brings out in the strongest ways the interweaving of our own free will, our own personal choices, our own individual histories, and God's will, God the director, the choreographer of our lives, of history, of creation. And On the one hand, this cupbearer had forgotten all about Yosef. That was his. He forgot. On the other hand, when he remembers, it's at the proper time, the propitious time, when Yosef's release from jail has a purpose for Yosef, for Pharaoh, for Egypt, for Israel, for the world, and so on and so forth. And from here on in, right through the end of the book of Genesis, it is almost like two parallel stories being written. The story of a bunch of people, human, fallible, with their ups and downs, their emotions, their baggage that they're carrying, their history, their own personal histories, their relationships with one another. And the parallel story is God shaping and directing and moving people forward in the direction that he wants in order to achieve what his ultimate goal at this juncture in history is, which is that Israel will be in Egypt, so that God can set up Act 2 of this amazing story of our history of humanity. Act 2, of course, will be the enslavement and then exodus from Egypt. So that's what's happening in Parashat Miketz, which we read this coming Shabbat. As I mentioned before, tonight is the first day of the new month of Tevet. Tevet is a very curious month. It opens up in the glory of the final days of Hanukkah. And of course, in Hanukkah, we begin with lighting one light, one candle on the first night, and each night we add a candle. So the first 3 days of Tevet, which are the 6th, 7th, and 8th day of Hanukkah, are the real crescendo to the holiday of Hanukkah, its brightest days. And it's so Tevet comes in a burst of glory. And then on the 10th of Tevet, we have a fast day, because it's a day of remembering the beginning of the siege of Jerusalem during the first temple, right? And Hanukkah deals with the second temple. Now we're back to the first temple, the beginning of the siege that will lead to the destruction of the first temple. So we have a fast day on the 10th day, and in fact, the 2 days preceding the 10th of Tevet, the 8th and 9th, are also, once upon a time, were also fast days. They haven't been for quite some time, but they're also days, solemn days of remembering the death of Ezra and Nehemiah, those who brought Israel back to Jerusalem and began the rebuilding of the second Holy Temple, back from the Babylonian exile, and also the writing of the Septuagint, the translation of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, into Greek, considered to be a dark day in our history. But we'll talk about that next week when we're closer to those days. I just want to mention that Tevet is very unique in that, in fact, Hanukkah is unique in that is the only holiday that bridges over 2 months. Of course, our other holidays start either on the 1st of the year, as does 1st of the month, as does Rosh Hashanah, or on the 15th, the middle of the month, the full moon of the month, as do Sukkot and Passover. And then, of course, there is Shavuot, which is also unique in its own way. It begins on the 6th of the month of Sivan. But Hanukkah is the one month that actually bridges over 2 months. Now, of course, it's not a month. It's not a holiday that derives from the Torah. The holiday derives later in our history, based on the doings, the fight led by the Maccabean warriors, the family of Mattathiah and his 5 sons, against the Greek oppressors. We have posted on our Facebook page over the past week the first 4 chapters of the first book of the Maccabees, which was written soon after the events actually took place. And those 4 chapters describe the offenses by the Greek oppressors, led by Antiochus, the dictator, the tyrant, who was trying to uproot Judaism from the Jews. And it describes his offenses. It describes the ultimate reaction by Matityahu against what was going on amongst the Jewish people, many who are succumbing to the temptations and seductions of the Greek way of life. And it goes on to describe the battles between the Hashmonim, the Maccabean group of warriors and fighters, against the much larger and much more well-supplied army of Antiochus. And the fourth chapter describes the recapturing, the liberation of the Holy Temple, and basically what we're celebrating here on Hanukkah, which is the cleaning up of the temple, the removal of the idolatries from the temple, and the purification of the temple, and the quick reconstruction of the necessary vessels in order to, as quickly as possible, renew the avodah tamid, the daily service in the Holy Temple. And as we know, it took them 8 days in order to get things ready to begin again, the service. And it also, during those 8 days, they were able to quickly fabricate sort of a makeshift menorah out of spears that they, swords that they stood upright, and made 8 posts upon which they could place lamps, and place that pure oil that they discovered, that one cruse of pure oil that they discovered that lasted 8 days. That is the miracle of the 8 days of the light of Hanukkah, which, as we've said before, was sort of God's way of saying, Kol hakavod, that's Hebrew for good going, guys. You did it, and I acknowledge the amazing thing that you've done. You have inspired this miracle that I am blessing you with right now, so that what has happened here shall always be remembered and celebrated. And of course, we talked about it last week. Today, many people, it's become a very, very, very universal holiday. I mean, a lot of people like to celebrate it. It's easy enough. It's fun. There's no special rules, no special don'ts. Just a couple of do's that basically amounts to lighting the Chanukah, making a blessing. So everybody seems to get in on the act, and people attribute to it all sorts of wonderful universal meanings of acceptance and tolerance and freedom, and they're all very beautiful. However, let's not forget that the fight was not for acceptance and tolerance and freedom. It was for the Torah way of life. It was for the way of life of the people of Israel. Now, who have now, by this time in history, are widely known as the Jews from Yehudah, from the tribal area of Yehudah, the Yehudim, the Jews. And they were fighting for their way of life, which Torah is more than freedom of expression. It's more than a religion. It's more than a ritual. It's more than a catechism. It's an entire way of viewing, of understanding existence. It's a civilization. And the oppressors were trying to snuff out this civilization. Torah is our air, it's our oxygen. So basically, while they were not physically trying to annihilate the Jews, they were spiritually trying to annihilate the Jews, and it's all one and the same thing, because if you were able to, God forbid, snuff out the light of Torah, you would be killing physically the Jewish people. So that's what Hanukkah really is about. And again, it's very beautiful that people give it new and very universal meanings. But many of those people who celebrate Hanukkah for those universal meanings would be shocked or disgusted if they knew the real meaning, which was simply one nation fighting for its life against another nation that was trying to subjugate its way of life and eradicate its way of life. It's that simple. It wasn't a universal thing. It wasn't muchi-puchi. It wasn't let's all get together and accept one another. Those are wonderful lessons, and maybe in some way derived from the main lesson of Hanukkah, which is if you're living the truth, you got to fight for it. When someone comes to try to destroy it, you have to fight for it. And if you fight for it, and you're fighting for the truth, then God will pitch in on that fight and let you know that you're on the side of truth. And that's what the Hanukkah lights are about. And let's just talk about those Hanukkah lights a little more. As we said, we start with the one light, the first night, and we continue and build up each night till finally the 8th night, which will be Thursday evening. We arrive at all 8 lights. Now, there had been a machloket, a difference of opinion. There were 2 schools of thought about 100 BCE. One was called Beit Shammai, the house of Shammai, and one was called Beit Hillel, the house of Hillel. And Shammai, he felt that we should start with 8 lamps, 8 candles, and take one away each day, so that by the 8th day of Hanukkah we have one single candle. Beit Hillel, who we follow, said start with 1 and continue to 8. And there's a whole different perspective, a different philosophy in each of their rulings. It wasn't simply a technical issue. It was based on how they understood life, reality, truth, and the message of Hanukkah. But we go by Beit Hillel, by the house of Hillel, and so we increase. And so on the final night of Hanukkah, we have 8 lights. And the final day of Hanukkah is called Zot Hanukkah, which literally means this is Hanukkah. Now, why do we call it Zot Hanukkah? Because during the 8 days of Hanukkah, each day we read from the Torah. And what we are actually reading is from the book of Numbers. It's actually Parashat Miketz, and it begins on chapter, I think we begin the reading on chapter 7, right? Chapter 7, verse 1 in the book of Numbers. And it's the day that, I'll just read that first verse to place everybody. And it came to pass on that day that Moshe had finished setting up the tabernacle, and had anointed it and sanctified and all its instruments, both the altar and all its vessels, and had anointed them and sanctified them, that the princes of Israel, heads of the houses of their fathers, who are the princes of the tribes, and were over them that were numbered, offered. Okay, this is when the heads of each of the 12 tribes, one after the other, one day at a time, brought offerings and gifts for the newly constructed and about to be dedicated tabernacle, Mishkan. And so each day we read of a new prince, a new tribal head. First day we begin with Nachshon, the son of Aminadav of the tribe of Yehudah. And it transpires that each of the 12 tribal leaders brings identical gifts. So during the 8 days we read each day one of those offerings. So basically by the 8th day, we're reading about the 8th offering, the 8th day of offering, which was offered by Gamliel, the son of Petatzor, prince of the children of Menashe. But on that 8th day, we actually continue our reading. It's a long reading, and we continue it all the way through the end of chapter 7, which goes on for 12 days, because there were 12 tribes, and concludes with these words. This was the dedication of the altar. This is verse 84 from chapter 7, book of Numbers. This was the dedication of the altar in the day when it was anointed by the princes of Israel. And so now they give a total reckoning of all 12 sets of gifts. They add them all up. And this is how this concludes. The reading concludes. But this expression that I read just a moment ago from verse 84, chapter 7, this was the dedication of the altar. In Hebrew, it's Zot Hanukkah Mizbeach. Hanukkah means dedication. It happens that Hanukkah also means education. Chinuch is education. Hanukkah is education. And I think it's very interesting that dedication and education share the same word. But Zot Hanukkah is basically describing in the verse that this is how they dedicated the altar, the great stone altar upon which they would be bringing offerings. So we call this day, the 8th day of Hanukkah, Zot Hanukkah. And in calling the final day, the 8th day of Hanukkah, Zot Hanukkah, takes on a meaning of its own. And that basically this is Hanukkah. This 8th day epitomizes Hanukkah. This is what it's all about. This 8 lights, this totality of all these lights. And over the 8 days, we have actually lit a total of 36 lights, 36 candles. And now we are in the brightest day. The 8th day is the brightest day. And as we have mentioned before, these lights that we light on Hanukkah are representative of, and also an expression of that. By expression, I mean it's a manifestation of the light of the Ein Sof, the infinite light of Hashem, of God, the infinite light that preceded creation, the infinite light that is everything. And when God created, he put some of this light into creation and held some of this light back. And when God saw, when creating, that there was going to be evil people in the world, and he didn't want to share this light with those evil people, he even took a little more back, which we call the organuz, the hidden light of creation, which God will share with us at the end of days when the righteous rule the day and all is good. And this light will shine forth and burst forth in all its glory. Well, that's what Hanukkah is, a taste of each year. It's a taste. It's a real taste. It's an inoculation. Getting back to the month of Tevet, right? So we're starting with these bright days, and then we're going to go into a dark period. The 10th of Tevet, a day that is the anniversary of the beginning of the end of the first temple. But these final lights and the totality of the lights of Hanukkah, which bring in the month of Tevet, are like an inoculation. And those lights will, if we take them in, breathe them in, really open our eyes and our hearts to them, they'll get us through. They'll get us through. They will inoculate us and strengthen us, and give us the strength, the insight, the inspiration, the courage, and the optimism to get through another year. And again, the fact that Hanukkah comes at the darkest time of the year is, once again, as we're talking about Parashat Miketz, it's man does and man plans and God does, and these are historical things. These are historical dates. It's history that on the 25th of the month of Kislev, that the Hashmonaim, the Maccabees, that they re-entered the Holy Temple and began the process of retaking the temple, purifying it, and making it alive again, holy again, pure again. On the same token, by the same token, why was it the 25th of Kislev and not the 25th of a summer month? I don't know, but perhaps this was God's part in the whole thing. Let's put it in the darkest of times, so that these lights will really, really shine forth when we need it most. And brothers and sisters, everybody needs light in their life, and I know that a lot of people are struggling right now with life. The coronavirus has darkened a lot of people's lives, people's livelihood. People are in isolation. People have lost loved ones. It's been a super tough time. I don't think that we give ourselves enough credit for what we're going through. I think that there's so much talk about and so much controversy about government policy and about this vaccine and that vaccine and who's doing what and why me and why them, and I just want to work and I just want to make some money and you're killing me, and that with all this, I think that we forget how difficult it really has been and how much strength it takes to get through. And we really have to, I think that's what we have to focus on, and share the light with people and be receptacles of light and be givers of light. And let's take that away from this Hanukkah. Let us be like the lamps of Hanukkah, just lighting up the darkness and brightening up everybody's day. And let's share it with one another. Let's share the light, because the light is God's goodness. The light is God's truth. The light is the only way forward in darkness. And as our sages like to say, if you want to get rid of darkness, you just have to strike a match. It's a little bit of light will just decimate a whole lot of darkness. So if everybody can shine a little bit of light into their own lives and into their neighbors' lives and their loved ones' lives and their friends' lives and a stranger that you walk by on the road, now's the time. Hopefully we are beginning to see the beginning of the end of the whole Corona episode. But there's still a ways to go, and sometimes they say the darkest hour is just before the dawn. So now's really the time to share this wonderful, pure, holy, uplifting light of Chanukah, and help one another through these dark days. And just as in 1 week from now, the physical days are going to actually start getting longer, meaning the hours of daylight are going to be getting longer. And the spiritual level right now in Hanukkah, those days are already getting longer. Our spiritual light should be growing. And that, I believe, is the greatest takeaway and the greatest message of Hanukkah. And again, it's not disconnected from the message that I mentioned before, which is Hanukkah is a story of a people, a nation, a small nation, a greatly outnumbered nation that was fighting for its way of life, for its reality, for how it sees things, for its freedom, against those forces that say my way or the highway. Let's all be the same. Let's all think the same. We don't need to all think the same. We all need to pursue the truth, I believe, and we all have our own ways of pursuing the truth and arriving at the truth. And I believe there's more than one way to pursue and arrive at the truth. But and that's what brotherhood's about. That's what the Holy Temple's about, because that is a house of prayer for all nations. All nations means all different societies, all different realities, all different civilizations. But we meet at this place of light, at this place of truth, and we honor and worship and bathe in the light of the one true God, while we recognize that we're all different. A very beautiful thing is happening in the Middle East, as Israel has now again signed, opened up relations with Morocco, which is not really in the Middle East, it's in the Western North Africa, but they are another Muslim country which has, I would say, come out of the closet, because Israel had relations with Morocco before, but now they've become official, out of the closet. Those relations are going to be getting stronger. But I want to say that there's on the internet, there are all sorts of videos showing Muslims, Arabs in the Emirates, I think even in Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, who are lighting Hanukkah candles. They're getting into it. That's beautiful. It's all beautiful. You want to light Hanukkah candles? It's very beautiful. But of course, let's try not to mix the message or to appropriate the message and change it. Again, I think if everybody fights for their reality and their way of life and the truth in their lives, I think that makes us all together, makes us all one, makes us all brothers and sisters. if you try to persuade someone that your way is better than their way, that doesn't bring us together, that keeps us apart. So that is Zot Hanukkah, this brilliant light that we take in. It's like, a big gulp of fresh water when you're super thirsty, or a big breath of air when you're really out of breath and you need that fresh air, and you just take it in and exhale it throughout the year, and it'll get you through the year. It's a perfect time for this holiday because it comes between the holidays of Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, and of course Passover, Pesach, which is in the spring. It's a dead of winter, and it's, like I said, it's like an inoculation to push us on through and keep us going. And like I said, I really think it's today more than ever. It is such a necessary thing. Getting back to Parashat Miketz, this, of course, is a story of Pharaoh's dreams, Yosef's meteoric rise to power, position, and of course, the story of the brothers whom Yaakov sends into Egypt to get provisions, because the famine, which the 7-year famine is hitting all the lands, not just Egypt, and even in Canaan, where Yaakov and his sons are, they are feeling the effect of it, and Yaakov hears that there's food down in Egypt. Even back then, there was some kind of way of getting the news out, and some kind of media. Somehow Yaakov knew, perhaps people were traveling, and he heard from merchants who were traveling by. A very interesting line in Miketz, in Genesis chapter 42, the first verse. It says, now when Yaakov saw that there was no corn, now when Yaakov saw that there was corn in Egypt, Yaakov said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" And he said, "Behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. Go down there and buy for us from there, that we may live and not die." Not exactly sure why he translates provisions here. I would say it would be a more accurate translation. I don't know why it translates it as corn. But anyway, that's how it does. But what I like is that line, Vayomer Yaakov levanav lama titra'u. Why are you looking at one another? Why are you staring at one another? It's to me a somewhat humorous line. It's like he's saying, you bunch of bumbling idiots, why don't you do anything about this? Which, it tells me something, that maybe the brothers weren't really functioning as brothers, as a family, maybe ever since what they did to Yosef, which was already many years earlier. Maybe they just hadn't gotten it together again. I mean, maybe they had put themselves in this place of darkness where they knew they had done something very wrong. As far as they understood, they couldn't undo it. And so they weren't really functioning. So Yaakov had to tell his grown sons, get it together, go down into Egypt, purchase some provisions, and bring them back up so we can live. Yaakov's an elderly man now. He's not a kid anymore. His sons are adults. They should be the ones with the initiative, but they're not. And again, I feel that they more or less were not functioning, and they wouldn't begin to function again until they get back together with Yosef. Here is the music. Thank you so much for being with me. I wish you all a very, very, very happy Hanukkah, a very, very happy Rosh Chodesh tonight, and a very, very happy Zot Hanukkah. Take in the light, share it with the world. Thanks for being with me. Temple Talk.